Thanks for listening to the Next Set podcast and today's episode. If this episode or previous episodes have helped you think or train differently, please share it with someone who needs it. You can find more coaching resources at apextacticalathletics.com. Put that in the description, and you can find us on Instagram at the Next Set podcast. We'll see you at the next set. Hey everyone, welcome to this episode of the Next Set podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Rehan Tahir. Today I don't have a guest. It's just going to be a chat. Probably not a very long chat, but I wanted to talk a little bit today about what it means to train like an athlete. You may have heard me say that, or you may have heard others say that in terms of training and coaching. And so what comes to mind for some folks when we talk about training like an athlete might be a lot of sprinting, a lot of jumping, a lot of different types of movements you might see. And that's perhaps part of it, but taking a step back and really kind of giving you a 10,000 or 30,000 foot view, if you will, it actually comes down to how we phase out the different levels of training or adaptations that we're looking for an individual. And so I'm going to talk about at a very high level. This is not going to be a deep dive onto all things periodization, but we're going to talk a little bit about periodization and what that means in the context of general population, your average Joe, 30s, 40s, 50s, and beyond, and how that could be applicable in terms of taking someone from a very deconditioned state to a state of being more fit and also incorporating some specific or quote unquote functional type movements that might be applicable or relevant to your own personal life, whether you sit at a desk all day long, or whether you just hope to have some level of playing sports, whether it's tennis, golf. I know a lot of folks like to play basketball, especially men in my age group in their 40s, and kind of relive the youth or keep the youth going as long as we can, so to speak. So I have a short slide deck. I want to talk about it again, and then we're going to just kind of delve a little deeper. What does it mean for you in terms of training like an athlete? So I'm going to get my presentation up here real quick. Give me one moment, please. And we're going to go ahead and get this going. By the way, while I'm doing this and bringing this up, a lot of my recent videos have been very blurry when I upload them, and it's because I've been using Zoom as a primary mechanism for a recording. So I'm going to go ahead and switch and try a new tool today. And let's see if this comes out better when I render this post-production and upload it, and hopefully the quality is better than what we've seen in the past. So I apologize for those that have had to deal with blurry videos. It's very frustrating when I look at it, so I can only imagine for those of you that are looking at it. So training like an athlete, what is it? When I program through my company, Apex Tactical Athletics, and when I bring in folks, I talk about a framework, I talk about a system, I talk about a structure. And for me, a framework, I'm a very process-oriented person. And it says evidence-based performance coaching. I mean, look, it's research-driven in a lot of ways. But the bottom line is, we're looking to use what we know from research. And a lot of this started in the 50s and with Soviet era type programming and training. So it's not new information, but it may be foreign to some of you who have never been an athlete, who have never been trained by a strength coach. So what is periodization? Now, periodization, by definition, think of it in terms of it's a way that we organize and structure training over time. So think of putting phases together in a way that kind of lead like a stepping stone. One phase leads to the next. So it's that long-term organization of training into those different types of phases, right? And each phase has a distinct physiological target or adaptations. And so in terms of exercise science or a strength coach, we are looking at adaptations both by phases, and we'll talk a little bit about some of the terminology there. We also look at terms, in terms of your program or each individual exercise. What's the purpose? What's the adaptation that we're going for? Are we going to actually realize those adaptations by the end of that training block or that phase? And so that's a very important consideration. It could be movement related. It could be physiological in terms of your adaptations in terms of your energy systems, whether that's short-term anaerobic type activity or endurance. And so we're looking at the overall picture of maybe an athlete and what sport they play, for example, and when to go from a period of very general training to a period of more specific training, and then leading into a phase of competition. And so that at a high level is kind of how periodization works. There's linear periodization, which is kind of that very, very straightforward, simple type of progression phase to phase. Not a lot of changes in some cases. For example, bodybuilding. I mean, I think they're really it's very repetitive in a way almost. And also types of periodization called like block training, where you really have very focused, very specific types of phases that are really looking to elicit a specific type of adaptation, leading to specificity and different types of competition periods for an athlete, if you will. And so, talking about the general population, how is this relevant? Well, a lot of people, especially when they train, they're usually coming in with a zero structure. They may be watching some YouTube videos, they may be going by something that they learned in high school, and they're trying to repeat that over and over again. There's no real structure other than a group of exercises they've put together with no real rhyme or reason or an understanding of what they're trying to accomplish. Maybe they want fat loss, but they're running the same program over and over for weeks or months on end. And so they're really not getting progress over time. And so periodization is one way that actually could be achieved. So when we look at an athlete, we're talking about usually an annual plan. Could be longer, could be a multi-year sport. For example, in the Olympics, if they're peaking, that could be a multi-year type of plan. But for the most part, I think annual plan seems to be the general rule. And that in terms is called a macro cycle. Basically, the highest order of the kind of the structural unit of periodization, if you will. That is kind of the overarching life cycle. And then each of the types of phases would be broken down into mesocycles. So that could be a 3 or 4 week block, or a 6 week block, or even an 8 week block. I mean, depending upon what you're trying to do. And that is where you're trying to elicit those adaptations, that specific training focus. What are we looking for? Are we looking for a specific type of anaerobic adaptations for a specific type of sport during that phase? Is it speed? Is it agility? Is it power? Is it maximal strength? And so that is really kind of the core focus of that block of time, or that phase of time. And all of the exercises are generally programmed in a way that meets that. In terms of different types of mesocycles, there's also sequential and parallel and complex types of phase blocks that can be programmed as well. For example, if you're trying to do maximal strength, that doesn't necessarily mean you're only lifting low reps and high loads for every single exercise. There might be components of power mixed in, there might be components of agility mixed in, but the core focus of that particular phase is probably going to be strength, maximal strength related, for example. And then you have the microcycle, which is the individual training weeks that compose the mesocycle. So the microcycle composes the mesocycle, which then are the different phases that constitute the annual plan, or the macrocycle. And then you have each individual session, which is composed of each individual exercise. All of that leads up to kind of the overall annual plan for a particular athlete. And you have to think about the phase that the athlete is in. Are they off season? Are they pre-competition? Are they during competition? Or are they post-competition? So we'll talk a little bit about those phases. And then we'll try to see how does that apply to the everyday person. So phase one, generally speaking, is called general preparatory. There's other terms as well. So the terms I'm using are usually a mix of from BAMPA or half. I have references sprinkled throughout, and you can always look at these. Some of them are just general terms, but there's usually, I think, a few different terms you might hear for some of these phases and some of these periodization terminology. So don't get hung up on that. I think the concepts are what's most important. And so typically, when you're talking about a general preparation type phase, you're looking at what are the anatomical adaptations that we can elicit. Usually it's a lot of lower load type training, meaning that it's not near maximal strength training. It's usually more, we're trying to basically prepare the body for movement. And that could be in the way of enhancing aerobic base training, very low endurance aerobic activity, mobility training, some skill development in terms of just trying to learn form basic form, making sure the person knows how to properly breathe, brace, and conduct the exercises while slowly building up a physiological base, right? Multi-joint movements, it's very basic, it's foundational. It is also building capacity. And typically the general preparation phase might be a 4-week phase or an 8-week phase. So for the average person coming into a training cycle, for example, usually most people start here. Even people who think they're very fit or who are seemingly fit will have some level of general preparation. Basically, we're laying the foundation, right? You might be deconditioned, you might come in with bad habits, you might come in with foundations or cracks in the foundation that you're bringing in. We'll talk about it in the next phase. You might have been stuck in a particular phase for a lengthy period of time. It all depends upon the needs analysis. What are you trying to do? If you're trying to just lose weight, but you're very, very out of shape or very deconditioned, this is most likely where you're going to start. And it could be something as simple as walking, introducing some basic warm-up type movements, and preparing your body for what comes down the road, right? And also, we're looking at neuromuscular adaptations. Neuromuscular adaptations happen several weeks into a new trainee's program. So they're taking advantage of those. They're taking advantage of any remodeling that happens in the tendons and the ligaments, and making sure that they're not outpacing their body's ability, the structural adaptations needed to be healthy and to prevent injury, right? There's collagen synthesis involved, connective tissue involved. So really the goal is it's not to be sore, it's not to go balls to the wall, it's to basically build that foundation and prepare you for what's coming down the road. Then you have accumulation or hypertrophy, if you will, or endurance, strength endurance, muscle endurance. And these are usually higher volume type sets. Think of this as kind of your bodybuilding type training, higher volume, moderate intensity. You are getting now into the progressive overload phase where each week or two, you're actually seeing some increases in load or intensity to help bring up the adaptations in the strength and the muscular endurance and the hypertrophy, right? And so mechanical tension, metabolic stress, those are some of the indications from a strength training perspective. Um, and you're leading into, as an output of this phase, going into maximal strength, right? Or if you're looking at endurance as you're building your base in the general preparation phase, now you're ramping up aerobic endurance, and then you might be looking at a specific type of endurance depending upon if your sport is a triathlete or a marathon runner, for example. And then are we building anaerobic power, anaerobic tolerance, lactic threshold clearance? So those are the kind of areas that we might be looking at here to elicit basically an increase in performance. We're preparing your body now from building the base to now building performance in the subsequent phases. As a general population person, comparing that to an athlete, most people, I would say, probably spend the majority of their time here. Many people skip that foundational general preparation phase and they come here. They start a program and they're dieting pretty strictly right away because they found this great diet that their friend recommended, and they're jumping into a bodybuilding style workout and they're going to the gym and they're in the gym for an hour. And guess what? They haven't built up the capacity. They haven't built up the proper movement patterns. They haven't built up core strength, for example, or they haven't tried to do any preventative training in terms of previous injuries. And so a lot of that goes into the preparation phase or skip. And so this area just kind of living here perpetually over and over for several months at a time. And then they wonder why they're not getting the results. Why aren't they seeing what they're looking for? Or they're getting injured or they're getting burned out. And so think of this as a transitionary phase into later cycles, which then will look at strength, for example, maximal strength, or then building into agility and power, which is what a lot of people are looking to do. If you're trying to play sports, if you're trying to play basketball, if you're trying to play tennis, and you want to be somewhat competitive into your late 30s and 40s and 50s, you can't live in kind of the general preparation and hypertrophy phases. You do have to prepare yourself for performance and also for injury resilience. And so this is something to think about. You do want to build some lean mass. You do want to build some strength, but you also want to preserve your capacity. You want to, increase your quality of life, if you will, and having that biological insurance, not just for aesthetics. Aesthetics are great, but we want to make sure that you're performing. So we're building the engine, right? More capacity, if you will. And then we come into a different phase here. Transmutation might be a term you hear, or pre-competitive or conversion. We're taking that that general preparation and then that hypertrophy type, muscular type training that we've done, or anaerobic type training that we've done to build power or lactate clearance for endurance athletes. And now we're trying to intensify that and apply it to a specific capacity or sports specificity, if you will. So this might be lower volume. This might be maximal strength for someone interested in powerlifting, for example, or Olympic lifting. This will be higher intensity and load and really kind of getting closer to that 1 rep maximum. There might be extended rest periods to account for that energy system to use your anaerobic system. Neural adaptations, trying to prepare the nervous system for higher loads and for rate of force development. So these are the things that, in terms of athletic development, will be looked at. It might be speed specificity and also speed endurance and agility. And so these types of training come into more play during these types of periods where, as an athlete, you're really trying to prepare for competition. You're trying to maximize and you're trying to get to a point where you're peaking your performance to meet the needs of an in-season or a specific competition like the Olympics or Worlds or whatever that might be. And so, you're trying to build on your preparation phases, your hypertrophy and strength, and now you're building that capacity for performance. What does that mean for the general person? It's not just maximal strength, right? You do have still that level of hypertrophy that you're working on, but you're also taking this phase into a broader category where, for example, if you're looking to be the weekend warrior and you're looking to play rec leagues, this is the time where you start to prepare your body for movement in different planes of motion, making sure that you're actually able to change direction quickly and prevent injury or landing mechanics or deceleration. And you really kind of putting all those things together and applying them so that way that you are physically prepared for those kind of sports. I do want to say something for this because I've seen a lot of back and forth on social media about sprinting and whether people over a certain age should be sprinting. My opinion is it depends. If you've gone through the phases of building up these types of capacity, and this is something that you are doing in terms of a specific goal and a specific need, you might need to sprint. Maybe it's not maximal sprinting, but to learn how to sprint correctly with the proper mechanics, I think is a good thing, but it comes with risk, just like any athlete. The idea is we try to mitigate the risk. We try to mitigate their risk against performance. The same thing with the general person. You have to be careful, right? And so, is it smart? Is it applicable? Is it needed? Maybe it's not needed. Maybe you don't need to be sprinting. But if that's something that's applicable for you, you should be learning the foundational ideas to be able to prepare your body to be able to do it and weigh that against the risk. So that's all I'll really say about it. I don't think that a lot of people do need to sprint necessarily, at least not maximally, but I think it's a skill. And like any skill, if you're trying to do that, you should be prepared. So in essence, this phase is really the sharpening of the skill set. You've built the foundation of your aerobic base or your strength base. You've built muscle. You're now preparing for maximal strength. And then maybe the output is now you're really preparing for skill development, sport development, or agility and speed type training. So this phase really kind of hones in on that. And then we have this phase, which is the realization phase or the main competition phase or peaking, whatever you'd like to call it, peaking in performance expression, which would be for in-season athletes, usually very low volume. It's really a maintenance type phase to make sure that they're not losing those anatomical adaptations we've built up until this point. Relatively higher intensity, lower volume, trying to reduce the fatigue. For example, if you have a in-season baseball or basketball player or football player, we're not going to want to tire them out too much during this phase. There might be periods where we ramp up and down depending upon travel schedules or practice schedules, but you're not really putting them through the same kind of intensity that you would in the off season. The goal really is to maintain what we've built and allow them to continuously peak as much as possible. And the idea is to maximize performance. For a general population, this might be a performance benchmark for you. One rep max testing. This might be peaking for a marathon or a triathlon or an Ironman or an endurance type sport, ultra marathon, for example. And so you do want to have those assessments, or you do want to peak for a specific type of event. But the idea is you need to start to taper at certain times and make sure that you're not overlapping a lot of intense training with those specific time periods. Much like general population. And so that's something that you need to think about, that you can't go 100% all the time. These are calculated and they're programmed. And if we're talking about the context of an annual plan over 12 months, for example, or even 3 to 6 months, there has to be ebbs and flows. There has to be a time for intense training, and there has to be a time to back off of it and let the adaptations sink in, if you will. And also, there's a concept of supercompensation, which is a discussion that we can have later. We're not necessarily adding anything new in this phase. Again, this is really maintenance in a way that allows peak performance. Maintenance might be the wrong word, but you're really eliciting peak performance and hopefully not losing those adaptations to a great degree that we've set up until this point. Now, when we talk about transition phases or cessation, this might be the end of the competition season that's that's tapering into an off season, if you will. And so the athlete's given a chance for active recovery. They may not do much training at all in terms of strength training or long endurance type activities. It might be a 4-week deloading plan where they come in and they're just doing fun things, leisurely things. It might be a little swimming, it might be a little golf, it might be a little hiking, whatever is mentally and physically relaxing in that sense. It's low activity, low intensity. It's varied. It's trying to get them mentally out of the rigors and the stress of competition. And you remember, the annual plan has been building foundationally up until this point, where they've peaked for a competitive phase or in-season phase, and so they need that break mentally and physically. Right? There's no structured progressive overload. We're not trying to push their limits at all in this situation. Sleep, recovery, those are the types of focus that we should have during this time frame. Something to think about too is, if I say there's a 4-week cessation phase at the end of the annual plan, there's also built-in weeks throughout the phases, between the phases, if you will, of deloading. So we progressively overload for a few weeks, and then we back off for a little bit, for a week, reduce volume, reduce intensity. Then we ramp up, and then we ramp down. We ramp up, we ramp down. So there's this ebb and flow throughout the year to kind of give the athlete that physical and mental break to a little degree. And then that period at the end of the year when they're really taking that time off and relaxing. And so they're reducing the fatigue. They might be rehabbing any injuries that came up during the year as well. What does that mean for you? A lot of people that we work with do not understand the concept of taking a break or taking it slow, the general adaptation phase. So those are two areas where sometimes I have to do a lot of convincing. Is, I get it, you've been stuck in this way of bodybuilding training, and you're coming to me and you're asking why you're always injured and you want help. Well, you might be overtraining or overdoing that type of training, and that's not suitable at this moment. You need to shift your focus a little differently. Same thing here is, we could go hard for 4 to 6 weeks as we build your program, but we need to back off a little bit and give your body a chance to adapt. The adaptations will happen, but the recovery needs to happen as well. So it's got to be both. You can't have consistent adaptations forever and not expect some level of increased risk of injury or overtraining or overload. So we do have to watch that. And one mechanism that we do that is not over-programming, not progressing too quickly, but then as building in some of these deload periods where an athlete or a general population person can actually have a break, right? And so that needs to be programmed in as part of the overall plan, whatever that is. So if you start with a 4 to 8 week program of just kind of giving yourself a foundation, you might back off for a week, mentally recover from that phase, even though it's not really super intense. Sometimes maybe it's not needed too much, but I think it's a good practice. And then you jump into the next phase, which would be more hypertrophy training. For a few weeks, you back off, and then you go into more maximal strength training. So that's kind of the life cycle, really, overall, at a high level. And why does this matter for you? Every single week, every single phase, every single workout, every single exercise, they all serve a purpose, a deliberate purpose. In the beginning, it might be building mobility, building some core strength, or fixing or prehabbing some injuries that you might be experiencing or have experienced in the past. We're trying to build a foundation around that to help you build physical and mental resilience, right? There's also a concept of progressive overload. We need to make sure that to some degree you're adapting. Like, what's the point of training if you're not going to improve? If you're just going to come in and do 12 reps of the same weight every week, we're going to get the same exact results. So we need to make sure that we're boiling, we're simmering the frog, so to speak, instead of boiling the frog, right? We're building a small simmer to allow your body to slowly adapt over time, and then letting you kind of realize those adaptations, right? And not overloading you too quickly, but providing enough stimulus. If you recall, I think I did a video on general adaptation syndrome, Hans Selye, is we're trying to provide enough stimulus where your body does not get exhausted, but you're going through that alarm phase initially, and you're kind of backing off of that. And your body is constantly under this kind of stimulus. You have to have times of the overload, and you have to have times of a deload. And then lastly, we have variation, right? You might have a program that is very, very, I wouldn't call it redundant, if you will, for a few weeks. You're going to see similar exercises, similar movement patterns, and maybe there's some variation every few weeks and changing, some exercises. But your programming might change as well. So it's not just an exercising; it's the way we program, right? For example, if you're building strength endurance and you're doing muscular endurance, and you're doing higher reps with a moderate load, and you enter a maximal strength phase, you're obviously going to see the repetitions come down and the load go up. And so that's going to be a part of your variation. Or your rest periods might change, right, in terms of how much load you're lifting. So there's always something to tweak, whether it's exercise selection or intensity, or the program itself. So again, specificity based on the adaptations that we're looking for, progressive overload to make sure that we're eliciting that general adaptation syndrome, that we're providing stimulus to change and to see the adaptations that we want, and providing enough variation so that we're constantly adapting to that stimulus, and not leading to extinction, if you will, or basically not enough adaptations. So you don't need to train like an Olympic athlete, so to speak, but we can use some of these principles. And I think it's smart when we say train like an athlete. I think it's smart to say that you should be phasing your training. You should be periodizing your training. Do you need to get involved in agility training and power training? Maybe not. But you still need to have a level of a foundation put in place to build a base. And then based on that, you might need to move into a phase of building muscle or building some strength or a combination of both. There may be some endurance that you need to build, or cardiovascular endurance that you need to build. And so you might not take it to the degree of sports specificity, especially if you don't really care about you're not interested in playing a sport per se, but more interested in health and fitness. Maybe some of these phases are approached differently for you. And that's the beauty of customization, right? Every individual needs to be considered about what that means. What do these phases mean for you? You may not find yourself out there sprinting, but you might find some of these things important. For example, balance training or jump training or deceleration, just moving your body in a functional way to prevent injury and to improve quality of life long term. So that's my concept and my feeling of how train like an athlete applies to the general population. Again, this was not meant to be a primer of all things periodization and for exercise science students or kinesiology students, for example. This was meant to be contextual to show you the comparison, how we train athletes versus how this applies to you and how this type of programming is built in. And so the takeaway is this: you may have been training a specific type of way for a very long time. And it might be a good idea to evaluate what might need to change in your program in terms of how you train to help build up better resilience and close any gaps that you might have in your own training. And that's where I'm here to help. So if you have any questions, you all know where to find me on social media, Dr.Rehan Tahir. On Instagram, you can go to www.rehantahir.com to be taken to my personal site with all my links. You can book a discovery call with me. Let's chat. Let's talk. I'm open. There's no obligation. You sign up with me to book a discovery call, and we're just going to chat. We're going to talk about your goals, your pain points, your challenges. I'll tell you a little bit about my programming and how it applies to you and what I think that would be helpful for you. And that's just it. It's a conversation. And throughout my programs, I'm educating. I'm providing you the resources and the tools for you to do this for yourself. not necessarily to the level of programming like I've explained here, but enough to say these are the basics of nutrition, these are the basics of training, and enough for you to at least maintain a level of fitness. If you really, really have your heart set on, training for some type of endurance type sport or a sport that you love, then I definitely think you should strongly consider incorporating some type of phase training like I've described here, and I can help with that. So let me know what you think in the comments, or hit me up in the DMs, or book a discovery call. I'm here to help. I'm here to educate. Let me know what I can do to help you. Have a great day, everyone. Thanks for listening to the Next Set podcast and today's episode. If this episode or previous episodes have helped you think or train differently, please share it with someone who needs it. You can find more coaching resources at apextacticalathletics.com. Put that in the description, and you can find us on Instagram at the Next Set Podcast. We'll see you at the next set.